Okay. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you all again for being here. This event is hosted by NAMI-NYC, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City, and we're also live on Facebook. Hi, everyone joining us from Facebook. We're really glad that you're joining us tonight. For those who are joining us on Zoom, you can say hello in the chat. I can see we've got people from all over, lots of folks representing from New York City, but also folks from Alabama, Australia, Iowa, California, Toronto. So we're really excited to have you all here. For those of you joining us on Facebook, please feel free to put comments or questions on the live stream, and those will be passed on to us as well. We will be saving questions until the end, but we are going to be keeping track of those, and we'll be keeping track of those and hoping to get to as many as we can. We were expecting to have ASL interpretation, but we have not been able to locate our interpreter. If you are our interpreter, if you could please do a little reaction emoji or raise your hand so that we can so that you can help us out with that. That would be really great. We also do have closed captioning enabled. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you should have a show subtitle option. So please feel free to turn that on if you would like to put captions on. Oh, okay, yes, I do see. Thank you, Matt. I'm not sure if you're actually Matt or if you're just somebody using Matt's account. June, can you spotlight slash co-host our ASL interpreter? ASL Jackie. Thank you all for your patience. We are going to be getting started in just a moment. Perfect. Okay. Just one more second while we get them spotlighted so that you can all.
Sorry, I'm not finding the video. I see the name, but not the video.
I'm gonna ask them to unmute. Oh.
If you see the
Did we lose them? Sorry, folks. Okay, I really apologize. Our intent was to make this event accessible, and clearly that there appears to be an issue with that. So I do apologize for that. As I said, there's closed captioning available if anyone would like to turn that on for themselves, but we're going to continue on. Thank you all again so much for being here. As I said, NAMI-NYC is the host of this event, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City. We are a grassroots mental health organization dedicated to providing support, education, and advocacy for all individuals and families impacted by mental illness. I'm going to say a little bit about us and our services, and then I'm going to introduce you to our 4 panelists. As I said, our goal is to provide support, education, and advocacy. We do that by providing free support groups and classes for anybody who is either dealing with a mental health issue themselves or is supporting somebody that's living with a mental health issue. Whether that is someone in their family, a loved one, a friend, a significant other. We know that being in somebody's support network can be really challenging, and we want to make sure that folks who are part of those support networks are also getting the support for themselves, because we know that that support network is also really, really important. So we want to make sure that that is itself is supported and encouraged. We have more than 30 support groups that meet currently on Zoom. We're hoping to get back in person shortly. You can find out about all of our support groups on our website, NAMI-NYC.org, particularly on our calendar that has all of our groups and other events listed there. So it's a great place to find out about what we have available. And June just put the link for that in the chat, so feel free to go ahead and check that out. I do, particularly given the topic of this event, I want to highlight our Asian American and Pacific Islander support group, which will be meeting the 2nd and 4th Mondays of every month at 6 p.m. We also have other groups, again, for family members and friends, also for folks living with anxiety and depression. We have an LGBTQ support group, a Black Minds Matter support group, Hearing Voices, and many other groups, which are all peer-led. So each group is led by someone who either has dealt with a mental health issue themselves or is a family member or friend. So we're really trying to focus on that experience that people have and that they've gone through and what they've learned from that experience and what they want to share with others. So with that, oh, and the last thing is, if you would like to, the other way to find out more about our groups and classes is by calling our helpline. June is going to go ahead and put that number and email address in the chat, but for those of you who may just be listening, that number is going to be 212-684-3264, or you can email us at helpline@NAMI-NYC.org. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. Now, without further ado, I will be moderating, but I want to introduce our panelists this evening. I'm really honored and excited to have this group of people to speak on this topic. So first, we have Dr. Linh An, the Executive Director of the Chinese American Family Alliance for Mental Health, or CAFAMH. Yeah, go ahead and wave. Please feel free to, make yourself known. An organization, so her organization has served Chinese Americans in New York City for over 18 years. Next, we have Carolina Do, an actor, playwright, producer, and community organizer, and the founding, producing, artistic leader of the Song Collective. We also have Dr. Vanessa Lee, a licensed clinical psychologist and founder of The Pond, which is a private group practice that makes individual and group therapy and creative arts therapy accessible to the community. And finally, we have Karen Mock, the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of the Cosmos, a community for Asian women to care for their communities, themselves, and the world. Okay. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat to see if we did in fact have our interpreter, but no, alas. Okay, so this is our panelists. We're really excited to be talking today. Well, not excited, perhaps that's the wrong word, but we think it's a really important conversation to be having about COVID and mental health, and particularly how racism and xenophobia within the context of COVID have affected Asian Americans and Asian American communities. So our first question that we're gonna kick ourselves off with I would love it if each of our panelists could talk a little bit about what has been your experience of the intersection of Asian American identity and mental illness, and what comes to mind first when you think about that intersection. I'm going to let you all sort of pick who wants to start.
I could start. Just a little something about me. So I'm an anthropologist. And also I teach Asian American studies. So I'll be coming from it from that kind of perspective, along with the community perspective. So when I think about Asian American identity and mental health, I think about the diversity of Asian American groups, right? So like the English language fluency, the settlement patterns, socioeconomic status, and like just the relationship with colonialism, and also like the military interventions in Asia that led to certain groups coming here. I think of all this diversity, right? And just kind of like how the current mental health system is still very Eurocentric and very kind of like biomedical. And, you know, just a caveat, like today, I think all of us are female panelists, female presenting, and we're, you know, East Asian, Southeast Asian. So of course, take what we say with a grain of salt, because there's so much diversity. And we're just really hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation, rather than like this is the final word and we speak for our community. Because like we are part of a certain ethnic group, but we also have our own personal and professional experiences.
Thanks, Lynn, for sharing that. I will speak from my experience both with anxiety and depression, and also I'll try to be really clear when I'm speaking based on what I've learned from the community organizing work I've done for the past 4 years. So one of the first themes that comes to mind is the cultural stigma against seeking care for mental health. And there's been, I would say, a few inroads into research into why this is. And one of the techniques that I've had to learn myself is that somatic care and somatic ways of expressing mental health are very common in Asian communities, but the current medical system, as Lynn shared, doesn't really honor that. So for example, when you go to the doctor and they're like, well, what's wrong? You kind of are able to like say, oh, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way. Whereas for someone who maybe is a immigrant or a refugee, or someone who may not even speak English, they might feel like they have a stomach ache, but they're not necessarily connecting that to trauma or to a mental health condition. And so it becomes very hard for like a physician to make that conclusion. And so that's one limiting factor. I'll just add a second limiting factor I've observed is culturally sensitive care for the Asian American community is still a very new concept. I can't tell you how many conversations that I have on a weekly basis about how hard it is to find not only an Asian American therapist or physician or clinician, but a BIPOC identifying person who can provide mental health care. And because of that, a lot of folks who don't see themselves in the system, don't see someone who can understand them, aren't going to be very enthusiastic about seeking care, add on to the fact that they might be the only one in their family, the first in their family to try and take this step. And so these statistics that you'll see about the low rate at which Asian Americans are seeking mental health care have to do, I think, both with like systemic issues and also cultural issues. And my recommendation, I really excited to work with NAMI and choose to advocate for, is how can we increase access not only to mental health care overall, but also culturally sensitive care, because that's such a big barrier for the Asian American community to get care.
Yeah, and I would agree. Thank you, Karen and Lynn, for just kind of opening the stage. I did some research on stigma against mental illness amongst Asian American and Chinese immigrant communities in New York. And one thing that I still remember the participant kind of saying, and it really struck me, and I've never really even thought about that, was that the stigma against mental illness, mental challenges, a diagnosis is some people have, kind of voiced to me that that stigma that they perceive is stronger than stigma against being jailed and incarcerated. So the concept of being labeled, taking medication, seeing a psychiatrist, going for therapy, having hospitalized, it is that's definitely a very Western idea, more prevalent, and it's easier to talk about in the Western kind of culture and context. But in the East, this is something that we keep a secret. This is something you keep under wraps in the family a lot of the time. And in my own experience, clinically, I do see a lot of Asian Americans. And when we are thinking about the intersection of the identity of Asian American, my question or my thought of, what Lynn mentioned, the diversity also has to do with the generation. Which generation of Asian American are we talking about? Are we first generation? Are we couple generations in? Because the concept of seeking help, of even thinking about wellness, mental wellness, can be so different and so vast, depending on the culture that one embodies. Some Eastern, some Western, a bit of both. Which kind of Eastern, which kind of Western. So it's very complicated. But I think definitely, I'm very glad that I'm seeing a lot of outlets, a lot more articles, just a lot more in the media and in the pop culture, bringing out the need for Asian Americans to seek help, or the need for us to talk about things amongst Asians. So I'm happy about that, but it's still a big challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn, Karen, and Vanessa for opening it up. I think I agree completely with all of you about how there is this stigma and also this very heavy veil of silence in terms of when we talk about mental health and mental illness, and how what I've noticed from within my community, how if someone makes a point to want to seek help, it feels like it's a community failing if this person seeks help. Like for myself, I told my mom that I'm seeing a therapist, and for the first time, I have an Asian American female identifying therapist, which has really helped my process go from very, very zero of like having to explain myself. I think that's something where with an Asian American therapist, with my therapist, my current one, there's a shorthand and an effort that I don't have to put into, versus other therapists that I've seen where I have to explain a lot of the cultural stuff. And I'm like, I'm spending more time explaining to you about this thing rather than like getting to the root of this problem. But back to like when I tell my mom, or when we talk about things like mental illness in our families, my parents and people in my community were like, well, it's because of you. It's because you're unhappy with your life, or you chose a career that's not unhappy. If you talk to us about it, we'll figure it out together, without being able to understand that there are things that we cannot talk to you, our family member, about, because there are so many different there's conflicts in terms of like our relationship to a family member. And I think thinking about it from a Vietnamese perspective, as soon as we don't really have the word I in Vietnamese, and so when it's something to do with a personal thing, it also is in relationship to everyone else. And so when we're talking about mental illness, it then becomes, well, we're fine. What about you? Why are you doing something that is stirring up the pot? And also talking about how many of us who find ourselves here in America, like Lynn, you were saying earlier, and Karen, from like military intervention, there's a lot of generational trauma. There's a lot of trauma and violence that for generations has gone unspoken. And so those of us who are here right now, on stolen land, but also trying to figure out who our like who we are as Asian American, as Asian or American, we're also finally having to reckon with this sense of I that many of our relatives maybe never had to deal with. And so it is a lot of this, many different layers that are being peeled by, like Vanessa, you were saying, like, I'm just very, very excited that people are starting to have these conversations. And I see it with my peer group too, of like how we're able to be in conversation with one another and also talk about like where we come from, our anxieties, what causes our depression, what triggers us in settings where a few years ago we would have just, you know, never talked about it. Yeah. Oh,
I'm muted. There we go. Thank you all. Yeah, I think this is a really good sort of framework for this conversation. Some really important things to sort of frame the conversation. I think so. Specifically, Carolina, you sort of talked about, that generational trauma, right? I think it's also really important to talk about present day trauma, and particularly one of the goals with this event is to talk about the trauma that may be associated with instances of violence, that are unfortunately becoming more and more, or have been over the last year, much more visible, and certainly visible for the general public in a way that they have not been. So can you, if you could each sort of speak a little bit about some of the root causes of where you see that violence coming from? What are the sort of root causes of anti-Asian violence and xenophobia? And what does addressing some of those root causes look like?
I can start. Okay. Why don't you start first, since I start first last time?
No, I can say, like, for me, my firm belief is that it's the white delusional violence, what we consider like white supremacy, and the pillars of genocide, colonialism, and capitalism. I think we see it long before COVID. Long before that, we saw the violence against Asian bodies represented in our media, in our Hollywood films. We saw it with how our bodies were just glorified fodder for bullets in war movies, how we only served as these punching bags for the white protagonists to reach some sense of awakening. We see that in how America and the war machine that benefits from America's tax dollars continuously other countries and other people around the world to justify war. Speaking for myself, like it very much the root cause is what brought people from my country to these shores. It's like things that we are still reckoning with today in 2021, that we have never had, not even a formal apology, but a formal acknowledgement of the level of violence that if it were done to a European country, we would be barred at the UN. So that's where I think we can begin with talking about the root causes.
So maybe just follow up, Carolina. I think, part of the existing structures that uphold white privilege and supremacy, and I'm not talking about like individual white privilege, but like, well, yeah, that does happen, but like systematically as a system, right, is a very racist narrative. And practices of treating Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners, not true Americans. And if you take a historical perspective, this is not the first time, right? So we see it with the Page Act, where Chinese women were barred from coming to the US because they were considered, the assumption was that they were prostitutes and they were gonna corrupt the morality of hardworking white men. We also see that Asians has a history of being racialized as disease and carriers, but it's not only in just the Asian American experience. It's also like, if you look at other communities of color, right? Like when the bubonic plague happened in LA, 1924, authorities quarantined Mexican Americans, and they destroy hundreds of homes. And like part of that plan was that like, if they categorize Mexican Americans as public health nuisances, right, then they don't have to compensate these people and pay them for tearing down their homes because like they're a public health threat, right? So you see how like these themes of capitalism, of like racializing, scapegoating, get reproduced through generations and also cross communities of color. I mean, the main thing is really like non-whites have provisional status in America, and they're subject to expulsion, to violence, given shifting circumstances.
I have a follow-up question about that, but I don't know if Vanessa or Karen, you'd like to address this question. Yeah. So I would love it if we could talk. You both have really outlined right from a really grounded in the history and the background of this. You've talked about that very clearly, which I think is which is really important. And I'm wondering, so what impact does that have? How have you seen that kind of sort of exclusion, othering, and those kinds of that provisional status that you mentioned? How have you seen that, and anyone can address this, how have you seen that impact your communities?
I can say, just clinically, definitely have more Asian American clients seeking help because of heightened anxiety, because of everything that's in the news. And there's just so much commentary about these events. It's not just like giving you the facts and telling you this is what happened. There's a lot of commentary. There's a lot of, opinions about it. And then it's constant, right? Once one event is kind of exposed, somehow, like for the rest of the month, like whatever small event is happening is kind of like the theme is to bring it out in the public. And so a lot of people actually are quite activated and triggered. Kind of actually, these things do happen, right, out in the world, in our country. But now the news spotlights it, right? There's commentary about it. There's opinions about it. And one thing I would say is that the Atlantic shootings, it was really, really difficult for, most of the clients that I work with, because to them, it was like, it could have been my mom. It could have been my sister, right? It could have been one of the people I know. And so I would say that really has heightened a lot of anxiety. A lot of people, I mean, now maybe there's a little bit less kind of spotlighting and less media coverage. And so people are less anxious about maybe even public transportation. But I do know a lot of my clients, young professionals, their family members, the older generation, right, who maybe only, just really stuck on some of the bigger events that happened, really don't want to go out, or really, really worried about what could happen to them. There've been so many events, so many pictures, so many things out there now in the media compared to maybe 2 years ago. Things like this still happen, right? And the fact is that these instances have increased, but because of the spotlighting, the media coverage, I think it's just really shaken the people that I work with in the city, in the Asian American kind of community.
Yeah, I would add to that. In some ways, we similarly saw an outpouring of folks looking for support during that time of the Atlanta shooting and after. And it's really hard to say that we have to have these tragedies happen for the media to care, for there suddenly to be attention on Asian American mental health and safety. And it is a really, really difficult thing as somebody who supports the community, because you kind of hope that this wouldn't be necessary, right? But some of the observations that I've heard from the community are that, you know, they had a real awakening, that finally it was time that they could address their Asian identity, that they were tired of putting up with microaggressions at the workplace, that they are going to seek mental health care. They maybe are going to start advocating for themselves when they feel unsafe. And that was like a good thing to see, but like I said, bad that had to be a tragic event that had to happen. I think a lot of folks really feel shaken, and especially in New York, you know, daily reports of folks getting attacked, and maybe the media cycle has stopped covering it, but it's still happening, and there's like no reason for it, right? And a lot of them are older folks, and so how does that affect somebody who already has PTSD, who has anxiety, who has a condition where they're not feeling safe at all and in general, and then to have this added layer of fear and stress, I think it's extremely damaging on the community. And on top of that, there's the whole COVID pandemic stress. So to see that our community has gone through these multiple layers of trauma and stress, I think we're only at the beginning of seeing what the impact of it will be. But one thing I also similarly feel hopeful, you know, even being on this panel and meeting other practitioners, is that there are folks saying, hey, I'm here to help. You know, NAMI has a support group. Like, there are all these different places that are starting to be more vocal and being able to provide support. And my, you know, hope is that the more that we have these conversations and do the destigmatizing work, the more that even as these things happen and have happened for generations, what might change with this generation and future generations is that mental health care can speak to those, to healthy ways of managing and coping with the trauma and the stress. So for that, it's conflicting feeling to be both grateful, but also to be kind of just very saddened that this is happening to community because of what you look like.
Yeah. Just kind of want to add on to what Ray said. So at CAFAMH, we work both with Chinese immigrant families and Asian American college students. So like what we see is the response is very different. A lot of the immigrant families we work with are limited English proficiency, very marginalized immigrant families. So there is that pandemic stress of losing their jobs, not knowing about like where to get tested with COVID. So there's that stress. But like with the violence that they're witnessing, part of like the media is this a great sense of anxiety, isolation, because community networks, family networks are kind of cut off because of COVID. So there's a lot of social isolation. I think with our college students, we see a much more questioning of their they grew up with this idea of like, I am an American, right? So what the attacks have done is to really kind of shaking them to the core, like, wait, so I'm not really American, my acceptance is conditional, right? So there's much more, I would say, kind of thinking through that racial piece with our families, which, you know, like my family, they spent their formative years in Vietnam, right? So they didn't come here, they didn't learn about slavery or how colonization happened in America. They have a very different racial experiences. So they don't even have that language or cultural schema to understand that and to process that. So in our programming with families versus college students, it's a very different kind of outreach.
I think what I've noticed along the lines of what everyone is saying, this idea of how the younger generation, this younger community, because of the publicness of the shootings in Atlanta and the publicness of the acts of violence against the elders, it really hit people in one big tsunami that our Americanness is conditional, and that for many folks, whether it was subconscious or conscious, that we were not white, and reckoning with what that means when we're not white, and also the ways that we have benefited from not being Black, not being brown, and being more closer to white on this spectrum of privilege. And you know, in New York City, I remember the day that the Atlanta shootings happened, the NYPD like just put a task force out in Chinatown, and where a lot of massage workers, a lot of salon workers work, and there was no consideration in terms of how having the NYPD in these environments doesn't feel like an act of protection. It feels more like the same people who have perpetrated violence against the Asian community are the police themselves, like in terms of, you know, massage workers, in terms of undocumented folks, in terms of sex workers, in terms of LGBTQ folks. When the NYPD deployed that, people did not feel safe. I had people like calling me going like, they're around here, they're here, like, what do we do? What can we do? And it's this kind of feeling of seeking and trying to find community in this world of isolation, while reckoning on so many different levels of where we stand in America. And I think it was a continuation of the conversations that a lot of the younger generation had been having with their parents in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, and seeing how do we align, where do we, if we consider the Asian American community even a monolith, consider ourselves in this fight or in this praxis. And it is really, I don't know if we have the answers for it, but it's something where the question has to be like, how do we put funding where it is needed in terms of mental health, in terms of making sure that the people who need the help the most find the help, and it's easily accessible for them. Because I remember this was during the time where we were doing the census, and the fact that they translated the census questions into Vietnamese or Mandarin or Cantonese was a last minute thought. Even though so many people in New York City speak Vietnamese or Cantonese, or like, that was a last minute thought. And so while we think about like making things accessible, it has to be like language accessible. It has to be in the community, from the community itself, because there's already such a level of distrust of so many things because of the history that we have here in America.
Yeah, so let's chat a little bit about sort of that process of making resources accessible and what that actually looks like. How have you all seen, have you seen folks in your communities, in your circles, come together and sort of and defend themselves and start that healing process around around mental health and in support of each other's mental health?
I could share. So with our Asian families, we realized that a lot of community workshops in the Chinese language is super helpful, because even though there is a tech divide, like not everyone knows how to use Zoom, they could call in. We just have to make the directions like super clear on the flyer. You know, like, and I'm really proud of my students because they did this digital exhibit where they kind of explore these issues of allyship and where they are in terms of like racial justice, right? Because, you know, at the same time, they recognize this privilege that they have, but, you know, they also see their community hurting. So this digital exhibit was kind of like a space for them to think through those things. So like, I guess I'll just share, those are the two ways. For a fellowship program for Asian American college students, they did a service learning project where they helped adopt a mental health toolkit with NYU for Asian American college students. So like, I find that my students are much more like kind of like active in the sense of they want to do something. Yeah, so.
And from my observation, it seems like a lot of Asian American or even just people of color who are beginning to start that process in mental health healing and wellness, they're not afraid to admit that they're seeking help, or they're not afraid to talk about it with their family members who might still hold on to the stigma against, seeking mental, help. So I just see, it seems like, COVID has already put on a huge strain on our lives, on socialization. And then now there's another wave, this wave of the anti-Asian violence. A lot of people just kind of feel like they have to find other ways besides trying to do it themselves. So I've really seen people more open to talking about, getting help, or, even getting together with friends to talk and process some of these current events or this whole past year and a half, which I think is very encouraging, so instead of internalizing and keeping things so very private, I've really seen there has been more kind of courage or openness, and even maybe permission to talk about how things affect them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. One of the things that's been really inspiring to see is that Asian women are also questioning, like, how can I show up for my community and other BIPOC communities? There's a energy to not be silent or not to be quiet, and an urgency, I think, to do that in a way that really haven't seen in the before, or at least in the time that I've been doing this work. And right now, for example, we're running a program called Authentic Activism, and it's for Asian women to think about how they can do activist work, but also honor the cultural principles that so many of us were raised in. Like, it's not like today, I'm Asian American, I've been told never to, speak up or make noise. And then tomorrow, like, suddenly I can go to a protest and, like, be super outspoken. There's a journey there, and a lot of folks are interested in engaging in that questioning. And I think that's a big part of truly dispelling this, like, model minority myth or these kind of, like, myths or stereotypes that we're passive. It's just not true. It's just the way that we're choosing to do it is different. It's going to look more like it comes and honors our culture experience. I would say there's also a lot of grief. When after Atlanta, we held a lot of just community grieving and healing sessions. And I think as a community that traditionally maybe doesn't have the cultural value of processing emotions out loud or vocally, just being in a space with other Asian folks was really powerful and really healing. And I think there's just an element of feeling those emotions and not repressing them. And that's really important, I think, for mental health, because, a big part of why trauma continues, for example, right, is that we're just repressing and storing it away, and trying to cope with sometimes unhealthy behaviors. So to see folks actually saying, you know what, I'm going to take those days off, or I'm going to go and, like, talk to somebody. They're recognizing that they can't just keep pushing on. And that's where I think, as everyone has said, community becomes really important, because the current healthcare system fails to reach so many folks. It's not like you're going to go to your physician to talk about your grief. Then where do you go, right? That's where the support groups, community groups become so important. You don't want to be alone, but maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing that with your family or even your friends. So that kind of third space is really powerful. And then those spaces are actively talking about how to manage and move forward as a community. I think that's been really inspired as well.
I think if there's been any positive thing that has resulted from COVID is that for the first time, a lot of people had to be alone and to be with their thoughts and really reckon with who they want to be separate from everyone else, and really reflect on what things were working and what things were not working before. Like just thinking about in terms of the work week, in terms of what is my life like when I'm at home by myself in a safe space versus when I have to go to work and deal with all of these aggressions and microaggressions from the moment I step out of the door, on the train, into my office, till I get home. Like the things that I had to do, now I don't have to deal with that anymore. And how do I not go back to that space if for the first time I feel finally safe? And how I think it is not that we don't feel grief, is that you like Karen, you're saying like we express it in different ways. And now I think there's the way of like learning how to express it in a way that maybe is more public facing, that also while it's public facing is also reaching out to other people. Because for so long, we thought, at least for myself, like I was suffering in silence. I thought I was the only person that was dealing with this at the workplace, because oftentimes I was the only Asian person in the workplace. So you're dealing with this heightened level of like, am I going crazy, or is this like something that's shit? And then, you start talking to other people, you realize like, wait a minute, this is a whole system of ways that they have kept, like, of harm, of violence, of and so it is great that we're becoming more open with sharing that, because we're finding so many that our stories overlap, or that our stories run in parallel and are shared, and that we're not the only ones, which is very liberating in some ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. But I do want to sort of give a moment for, there were a couple of questions in the chat that I'd love to kind of circle back to. But I want to, but I just want to take this moment to encourage audience members, if you have questions, if there's something that's coming up for you and you want to ask the panelists, definitely put it in the chat. So one question that we had a minute ago was about, and you've sort of, several of you have sort of spoken to this, but the question was, how do we open up about mental health and therapy given the taboo? How do we start that dialogue? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, I think we're doing it. And I think that's what really drew me to NAMI, is that each person actually can do something by telling your story. And there's so much shame and guilt and fear and all kinds of nasty feelings, I think, that can come from, being vulnerable, especially about your mental health, given the stigma of it. The number of times that just maybe you're just naming a condition that you've experienced, or that someone has experienced, or maybe you're just listening, or maybe you're talking about medication that you use. And the number of people who might be like, oh, wow, like I also feel that way. You just never know, but that's so powerful. And people are really moved by like emotional personal storytelling. Like stats are great. And I think there are people who really, need that information for the research, for the work they do, especially folks who are on the breaking edge or of research in this space. But for kind of day-to-day helping destigmatize, a lot of folks aren't moved by that. And I think finding that For example, I was not willing to share that I had anxiety and depression. I didn't even tell my parents I was going to therapy or that I had been diagnosed because I was so afraid of what they would say. And over time, I started to realize that people would respond positively when I shared it. And so once I kind of like started to warm that up a little bit, nobody has ever been like, oh, ew, gross, like you have a mental health condition. Like, no one has ever done that. I don't know if that's just like everyone I have told is really nice, but I think it just gives me a lot of hope that these stories actually resonate. Mental illness and mental health conditions are very common. It's just we're not necessarily sharing all of that, right? So maybe we think we're the only ones, as folks have shared it today. And I think I needed to believe that I wasn't the only one. It's really hard to come out of that, especially I think for the conditions and the way that they show up for me, at least. And so it's almost like I have to remind myself by telling my story that this is not something I have to suffer through alone. I don't know if it helps to hear that, like most of like a lot of people probably feel the same way. Right? If we are all normalizing this conversation, if we're just able to talk about it, the workplace especially, I think is a major area that needs improvement. It's still a big area where I think people don't feel safe for all kinds of reasons and suffer silently. But start with your friends or start with people you trust, start with one person. And that can really make a big difference. So that's what I think I've, really grateful to NAMI for, is that they've shown me also, wow, like when you do this in like a massive level, like you can actually change legislature. Like how awesome is that? So not to, plug NAMI, I want to, because I'm really moved by the work that's been possible just through the act of normal people. We're all like normal people, like telling their mental health stories.
Yeah, I can share, like, it took me forever to really acknowledge that I needed to see a therapist. Because I grew up in a very violent household and a lot of mental illness, and I was suffering and still am suffering from a lot of depression and anxiety that stems from post-traumatic stress disorder. Like just like I enter a room, every room I enter, I know of an exit, I know of the ways to go, and I'm always watching people for their reactions in case there's a moment where they disengage. That means I feel like they hate me. That means I have to leave. Like that was always the voice that was coming in my head of like, you need to escape. This is a place that we need to escape. They hate you right now. Let's try to find a way to disengage. And it took me till a few months ago in therapy for me to be, with the encouragement of my therapist, to tell two people that I trusted that, even though I'm sitting with you right now and I'm having this conversation with you and I feel like it looks like I'm normal, inside I am so hypervigilant, and everything that I say I am weighing, and every look that you give me is either a cue for me to run or stay. And the amount of energy that it takes is exhausting, which is why you're like, why is it that there are days where I am hyperactive and working, and then a day later I'm a vegetable on a couch, and yet hating myself for wanting to be a vegetable on a couch? And I think, like you were saying, Karen, it's getting to that place where if there is finding one person that you can trust to share this with, and to acknowledge that, like, by saying it out loud, it's not as scary as it was when it was in your head.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
Thank you for sharing. This takes a lot of courage just to, tell your stories. Thank you so much.
I kind of want to go back a little bit to the, like, finding clinicians. During the pandemic, there was a really shortage of Chinese speaking clinicians, and we would just been trying to create space. We have a support group for grief, in Chinese language. But I think also I'm a culture anthropologist. I'm all about culture. But I also want to, like, we also have to hold the institutions accountable, because it's not, when we just talk about culture, what we're saying is that there's a disconnect. And again, we put the burden back on to the person. Like, yeah, and it softens it, yeah. But racism is racism. So systems and people can be racist and culturally insensitive, right? So I think it's very important to hold institutions accountable, and, you know, to really also fight for a pipeline of mental health commissions, because there's not enough. There's no way that they could fit the demand. So I really just think that a big part of my self-care is advocacy, and like holding people that responsible and accountable for what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to sort of the point that like it shouldn't, that you'd mentioned, Karen, like it shouldn't take something awful happening to get to the point where those institutions can be held accountable. We've got one more minute, and I've been seeing the chat, you know, really get going. So it's really exciting to see that. And I think the last question that might be, I don't know if we can all get to it in a minute, but I want to, I'd love to hear your sort of final thoughts. What can individuals, how can individuals come together, right? Because we can't do anything on our own. We have to do things as part of a community. How can people come together and hold those institutions accountable and support healing for ourselves and for each other?
I think, you know, as we said earlier too, just starting the conversation, sharing the stories that Karen and Carolina has done today, you know, and in our discussion, I think it's really just, you know, being open to finding allies, finding people who can support or, you know, guide you to the right direction. I mean, that is the easiest way. And I think, you know, institutions for sure, I think, you know, if we can ask for more support, you know, ask for more funding to provide spaces or to provide programming, so that when things happen, you know, it's not just, oh, another day at work. You know, sometimes people really need the space and extra, you know, support. So I think, you know, it's maybe also not being afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, I love that. I also think defining the institutions that like feel accessible to you. Like, I think it's a big leap to go from doing nothing to being like, I need to be like calling all of my state legislators, and understanding. I really like the theme here. It's not something's wrong with you because you don't know how to do this, or like it's scary. It's so important to understand the systemic forces that have made it hard for any minority population, or really anyone in general, to get help for mental health care. And if you're in a place where you feel like, okay, I've thought about that, I feel like I can separate this like self-blame that I have for like not taking care of myself, from like a system that's made that really difficult. That's where I wish everyone would start, because I think it's really hard to start like going on the journey if you're still kind of internally blaming yourself for the condition that you have or in your family. So like, care for yourself. Like, we're not martyrs here. No heroes needed. Like, care for yourself first and foremost, so you can help others. And then if it's, you know, as small as your team at work, it doesn't have to be your whole company, or if it's your like neighborhood area, and working with a local business to like talk about mental health. Like, it can be really small. Maybe you're just talking to a friend. I always try to think of little small things that you can do, and to try to approach it without like the self-judgment of, is it working? Am I changing everyone's lives? Like, how can we do this with that sense of care and compassion? Because I think that's what makes this this time and age of doing this work different. We don't have to go in with all the shame and all of the guilt. We can go slowly and with, like, I think what a lot of, in my opinion, like Asian culture does really well, which is like there's a real communal quality to Asian culture and how can we see that as a strength versus just a negative, and how can it feel like real and manageable for you and your life and where you are in your mental health journey. If you just need to take care of yourself, do that. That is one more person who is getting help, and that's part of the change too.
I forget who told me or where I read this from, but it's moving at the speed of trust, and not just trust for your community, but trust for yourself. Because if there's anything that I'm learning is that I have to learn to trust the inner voice inside my head that is encouraging me to do it, because I've been so programmed or used to finding ways to not trust myself. So even like those moments where like my body, my mind says, you need to just take today off. There's the voice that says, why? You're lazy. You should have been doing this. Why didn't you plan better? Blah, blah. And how do you trust your body? Like, I just need to take this day off. I need to do this because you can't, like, one thing my mom always tells me is like, you can't save the world if your house is on fire. So you got to make sure your house is okay. Make sure your temple yourself is okay. Yeah.
So I guess that leaves me. I think for me, a lot of it comes from teaching. Do a shout out to one of my students, Christina, who did the digital exhibit that you all saw. She led everything. And I think a lot of it has to start with kind of like teaching ethnic studies in K to 12, because I think that is one way to get a lot more people at an early age and to like help them understand and that everyone belongs. So that's all.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great note to end on. Really appreciate having this conversation. I'm really hoping that it can just be the first of an ongoing set of conversations about, we want to talk about the ways that structural issues and inequalities affect mental health. Our mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. And it's really important to sort of talk about that. And so I'm really hoping to just continue the conversation. Really appreciate all of our audience members. I know we went a little over, but we really appreciate all of you sticking around and being part of the conversation and contributing. We're gonna send out an email over the next couple of days with additional resources. There have been some things shared in the chat that we're definitely gonna include. But so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, I hear you, Josephine, it's too short, but we're trying to just really kick things off with this. We're not trying to cover everything. We know we can't do that no matter how much time we had. So this is just hopefully a harbinger of things to come. Definitely the Asian American and Pacific Islander support group that's going to be meeting 2nd and 4th Mondays at 6 p.m. Is another place to continue that conversation. And we really hope that people take advantage of that space. So with that, I'm going to say just a really big thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your expertise, and taking the time to talk to everyone. And of course, thank you to our audience members for appreciating the importance of this topic and dedicating an hour on a Thursday to this. So thank you, everyone. Have a really great evening. Keep an eye out for additional resources. and continue the conversation. Thank you to everyone joining us on Facebook as well. Thanks,
Howard,
everyone.
did you want us to hang back to debrief, or we could go to?
That, oh, hold on one second.
We probably should stop recording.